Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the University of Manchester Middle East Centre's online masterclass with Paul Patton on behavioral economy and disruptive technologies. A bit more about Paul Patton. He is a director with Limerick and Clare Education and Training Board, an authority responsible for the development and delivery of education and training in Ireland to approximately 25,000 learners annually. Paul has considerable experience in the education sector and has delivered workshops and masterclasses on behalf of Alliance Manchester Business School, part of the University of Manchester, for over 20 years now, all over the world, in Manchester, Dubai, Singapore, Shanghai, etc. Paul specializes in strategy and competition, covering topics as wide-ranging as disruptive technologies, the sharing economy, game theory strategy, with particular focus on innovation, efficiencies, investment, and profitability. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'll pass it over to Paul Patton. I would just like to let you know that if you do have any questions during the course of the session, please feel free to write them down in the chat box. We will try to go through as many of them as we can towards the end of the session, but apologies if we can't go through all of them. I know that there are many of you here, so we may not be able to go through all of them. So without further ado, thank you very much for being here this afternoon, and over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, William, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the masterclass on behaviour economy and disruptive technologies. And to kick off, I'll just outline what I hope to explore today. And first of all, I just want to explore the concept of how our behaviour is now more related to being an onsumer and online consumer. We now use the word onsumer rather than a traditional consumer. Also, I'd like just to give you an overview of how disruptive technologies have impacted innovation and efficiency within various businesses. And there is, if you look at the current COVID-19 and just even think of the transformation in terms of how we are using, say, video conferencing as we are using today in order to do this actual masterclass. Formerly, it would have been more of a face-to-face where I would maybe been in Dubai itself. And thirdly, how disruptive technologies has enabled the growth of the sharing economy and new business models. So without further ado, basically just looking at consumer versus onsumer behavior. As you know, consumer and onsumer behavior is influenced by many factors, but probably a key factor that influences our behavior either as a consumer or onsumer is scarcity. And scarcity leads to us making choices and also experiencing trade-offs. In fact, today you made a choice to actually come to this masterclass, so you made a trade-off. You could have alternatively been having lunch or been at work, so you made actually a trade-off. But what you faced was scarcity in time, okay? But scarcity can be more than time. Scarcity could be in terms of our amount of income, for example, and the level of our income can act as a constraint, and that will influence our choices and the various trade-offs that we experience. In the online world, scarcity is often basically determined in terms of what we term artificial scarcity. How many times have you been on an online platform, maybe booking.com, booking a hotel, maybe Airbnb, etc. And maybe you experience messages popping up on the online platform saying 4 other people are currently looking at this hotel room, maybe only 2 rooms left at the current price. That is artificial scarcity, where the actual platform is trying to influence your purchasing behavior by changing your perception, by trying to convince you as the onsumer that this, if you do not purchase now, then you may not actually get the hotel accommodation, etc. That's the concept of our artificial scarcity there. Consumer and consumer behaviors is also very much influenced at the moment by COVID-19. But the key thing with COVID-19 is that our behavior is also very reliant on the behavior of others. So, for example, if the government in a particular country is making it mandatory that people wear face masks to reduce the spread of COVID-19, and then if some people do not abide by that mandatory requirement, that could have a serious impact on somebody else contacting COVID-19. So COVID-19 has shifted people's behavior in that you're not only influenced by your own actual constraints, but you're very reliant on the behavior of others as well. So, for example, as well, from a business context, if you look at it with COVID-19, Sony has realized that there's a whole new demand there for home entertainment arising from COVID-19. So, from a strategy and competition point of view, Sony technically has identified a hidden market. Okay, a hidden market, and has identified this new demand for home entertainment because unfortunately we could not go out to our local cinemas, theaters, etc. We tended to stay at home. You probably took out maybe extra subscriptions to online demand streaming platforms like Netflix or Disney or other platforms, maybe Prime Video, etc., and other platforms that you may use. And what Sony has done there in July of 2020, they put a significant investment into Epic Games that owns Fortnite. Okay. But from a Sony point of view, making that decision also allows them the potential to exploit scale economies, because now there's a possibility that they can expand other content into the Fortnite cohort of consumers. So they basically may get scale economies from their investment. Or another way that they may actually get it is the economies of actual scope there as well, So in terms of then understanding this actual behavior, it allows us then to begin to think strategically about firms in dynamic competitive rival markets, okay, where these firms then are making strategic choices. So for example, if you look in the smartphone market, look at the various actions and reactions between, say, Apple and Huawei and Samsung, etc. Look at the sportswear market and look at the actions and reactions between Adidas and Nike and Puma and Under Armour, etc. And then it allows us then to begin to look at strategic games between various players, how those strategic games unfold, looking at the mutual interdependence between the players in that game through an action reaction chain of events. So, for example, if Apple was to, as it's currently doing, going to put more focus on developing the Apple Watch with the launch of the new Apple Series 6. How is the likes of Huawei and Samsung going to respond to Apple's intention now to put more focus into the Apple Watch? And equally, Apple last year also expressed its intention to move more into online streaming with Apple TV, etc. So all of the above then allows us to begin to focus on individual and rival experience and understand their actual observed patterns of behavior. And in basically empirical research, there's no doubt about it. And as human beings, we tend to repeat our behavior. And empirical research shows that we as human beings and then as managers in various companies, etc., tend to repeat our behavior approximately 70% of the time. Very important statistic. And also how past behavior influences future behavior. Think of that. How many times had you maybe entertained maybe friends or families, and you may have always gone to your actual favorite restaurant? So your past behavior of going to that particular your favorite restaurant will influence your future behavior of going to that favorite restaurant when other friends or families visit you. And then we also looked there at the whole idea of nudge theory and how different online platforms, like as I said earlier on, the artificial scarcity, how they can nudge you and how that can impact your consumer behavior and impact your actual purchasing behavior, etc. So, for example, in strategy and competition, we begin to look at patterns of behavior. And I suppose we start off looking at maybe our own individual pattern of behavior, and then we expand this into the business world. So let's say that your smartphone wakes you up at 7 a.m. in the morning. You leave the house by 7:25 a.m. You might use basically a smart card on the Dubai Metro or a taxi, etc, and you're checking your text messages, you're on your social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc. You know, you might stop off at your favorite coffee shop before you go into the office, say at 8:20. You're still texting on Facebook, FB, you're googling, etc. You might pay for your latte or your cappuccino with your near field communication payment app on your smartphone. But the important thing here is you're leaving a digital footprint behind you each time. You end up going to your office desk, you log in, you have to log in with your password, your username and password. You might get some text from a friend asking you to go for lunch, and you go for lunch at 12:30, and you might pay again with your credit card, a physical credit card, or you might pay with your credit card that's downloaded onto your smartphone. You log off your system at 17:30, but you have left a pattern of behavior, a digital pattern of behavior behind you. And the important thing from an economic strategy and competition point of view is, can a company find your pattern of behavior? Can they find a sequence in that pattern of behavior? And can they actually then try to code that pattern of behavior, manipulate it, okay, and maybe try to change your behavior in the actual future? So these are all the points at which you have used some type of digital technology. You've left a digital footprint behind you in all the systems that you've used. 7:45, you remember you're using your smartphone to pay for the metro or the Dubai taxi, whatever the case is, and 8:45 you're paying for your 8:25 you're paying for your latte with the near field communication in your smartphone, etc. Okay, and hence a pattern of behavior begins to evolve over Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then can we predict, or more so, can we influence your pattern of behavior on Friday? And a pattern evolves over week 1, week 2, week 3. Can we predict or can we manipulate your actual pattern of behavior in week number 4? You're well aware of newspaper reports a few years ago, on Cambridge Analytic. okay, where Cambridge Analytica was acquiring basically information about your purchasing behavior, okay, from companies and selling it on to third-party companies. And suddenly those third-party companies were using your basically data, your profile, in order to try to sell you basically other products or services. I remember in Europe that became quite contentious, and then they introduced the GDPR regulations, okay, the General Data Protection Regulations that were protecting consumers against the likes of Cambridge Analytica, etc., from selling on your actual uh, profile data to third-party actual companies. So what we do then in terms of game theory, this is actually a game in terms of a decision tree. So on Monday to Thursday, okay, you're going to your cost of coffee. Okay, so that is your pattern of behavior in time period T. That's your T pattern of behavior. So that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Now, so on Friday, okay, the question is if Starbucks here could actually acquire information on your actual on the fact that you are buying a coffee every morning, is there any way that Starbucks, by acquiring a profile data you could nudge your behavior at 8:20, and instead of you heading on to basically Costa at 8:20, you instead might go and purchase your latte at Starbucks? And that is your behavior in T plus one, okay? That's your behavior in the future, could be next week, could be next Friday, next week, whatever the case is, next month, is equal to your behavior today plus this nudge variable. And this is where basically policymakers or your data pharaohs like Cambridge Analytica, like Dunnhumby, Dunnhumby, gathers a whole load of information on our grocery purchases, etc. And Dunnhumby then tries to sell that information on to third-party companies, and suddenly you're getting basically vouchers in the post asking you to try product A, B, or C. Okay, and I'm not going to go through this nudge theory, but the idea is, can basically somebody nudge your consumer behavior or consumer behavior at that point in time, and maybe when you're deciding at this point in time at 8:45 to go to a certain restaurant, can again the actual some company actually influence your behavior. So as I said to you, you probably haven't counted already. 4 others are looking at this. Only 2 rooms left. How many times have you maybe gone in to buy a coffee and a barista person was offering you a pastry as well? Would you like a pastry with your coffee? That's upselling, okay? And the reason why basically companies do that is they are trying to influence your actual person behavior then. And if they can sell extra pastries, then that's extra sales for them. So that they're nudging your basically behavior. Um, I'm not sure if you have an iPhone 4 Plus. Now we're in now the iPhone 11, but since the iPhone 4 was actually developed, the Apple iBeacon technology was actually installed in that phone. And you can read more about iBeacon technology, just Google it. But the principle behind it is if you went into a large mall and retail outlets in that mall was using iBeacon technology, suddenly your smartphone will start pinging, and you might get a ping from the Nike store. We have a special sale on today with 10% off whatever product, okay? And again, the cookies that you actually leave behind you when you go on to online platforms is also given a lot of information to the online platform about your purchasing behaviors, okay? And this is quite important in a European Union context, because the Commissioner for Regulation in the European Union is very concerned at the moment about maybe how consumers are being manipulated by the what we call the SIAL, the sufficiently intelligent algorithms that are in the online platforms. And are these algorithms so intelligent that we as consumers might end up actually bidding against ourselves? And in the formal lectures, we go into the whole area of what is known as bin prices, buy it now prices versus end prices, the price that you end up paying. You may have experienced yourself where you went into an online platform, you were looking at accommodation, you went back then, you observed the price, you went back, that's the bin price. You went back then and you were talking to your partner about the accommodation and should we go for 2 days or 3 days, etc. You might come back to the same site the next day and you suddenly see it's there by $20 or $30, okay? And that's the end price. So a lot of times when we use online platforms, the bin price, the buy it now price is less than the end price, because the platform knows that you have come back onto the platform to look at this product or service again, and it knows that you have an intention, a willingness maybe to purchase. So it ups the price that you face the second or third time you revisit that particular platform. And what we do then in the strategy and competition, we apply this then all in terms of a business context, okay? So if I just pull up here, for example, the Sony um, and Microsoft case, okay? So for example, you're very familiar probably with the PlayStation. And when the PlayStation 2 was launched on the 26th of October 2000, it was launched at $299 US. Then Microsoft was looking at coming into this whole market, and Microsoft entered this market on the 15th of November 2001. Exactly, you can see there's price matching here. Microsoft Xbox was launched at $299. Now, on the 14th of May 2000, Sony had an action. It was a price action, and their price action was to reduce the price from $299 to $199.99 US. Okay, the very next day, Microsoft responded with a reaction. Okay, and the reaction there was to basically cut price also, but to undercut to $199. The question now is, how did Sony respond to that? Well, Sony did respond to that, but Sony didn't respond to that until the 13th of May 2003, when they reduced price further to $179.99, and Microsoft the very next day reduced price and undercut again to $179. So you can see there that there is an action and a reaction and a reply beginning to build up between these two companies, Sony and Microsoft, for this video consoles, the PS2 versus the Xbox, and a price war is beginning to actually emerge here. Interestingly, up to 2003, it was Sony was cutting its price first, followed by Microsoft. And Microsoft then in 2004, they observed that behavior. They observed that Sony was cutting its price in May of each year, and Microsoft decided it would actually move first. So in 2004, the 29th of March 2004, Microsoft was moved first. It looked at the past behavior of Sony, noted that Sony past behavior was to reduce prices in May of each year, and Microsoft basically took that information, that observed pattern of behavior, and manipulated to its own advantage by moving first in 2004. Sony did not move. Sony did not react the next day. Sony still stuck to what it always did: changes prices in May of 2004. So you can see this pattern of behavior beginning to emerge in terms of a price war between Sony and Microsoft here. So this is a game in a price war, and that's known as a Baumol type, where managers tend to basically compete on prices. They were given, we talk about a Baumol type playing a Bertrand strategy, okay? And after that, it was observed that a new game began after that. Sony and Microsoft realized that that price game was costing a lot of money, and they decided after that they would still compete, but their competition after 2004 tended to be non-price competition, tended to be competition in terms of launching new products, okay, in terms of product diversification, greater announcements in terms of capacity shipments on into the market, etc. Okay, and what we can develop from our observations there on price patterns is what's known as the Turing patterns of behavior. If you ever watched the film um, with Alan Turing in it, you would notice the Enigma machine, where he was trying to manipulate the patterns uh, of the coding patterns that the Germans are using to control their U-boats during the Second World War. So various price data patterns begin to arise there. I'll just move this out of my way. So various price data patterns begin to arise, and you can observe those various price patterns like that there. You know that there is an opening symmetric move. You know from the beginning to the end that is a 50% price reduction. But the important thing about this same price patterns, these same Turing patterns of price behaviors were repeated by Sony and Microsoft in 2010 and 2015 as well. Okay, and that's what we do in the actual workshops in strategy and competition, are looking at what is known as these Turing patterns of behavior that are identified by what we saw there was a critical timeline, and looking at the relationship between the actions and the reactions, as you saw there, the price actions and reactions. Okay, so I just want to move on now to what is a disruptive technology. Well, a disruptive technology is an innovation that uproots an established technology, or it might be a revolutionary product or service that creates a new industry. Think of smartphones, and especially think of the Apple iPhone when it was launched in 2007. Remember, prior to that, there were smartphones. You had, for example, uh, the BlackBerry, for example, and the BlackBerry was a phone that was used extensively in a business context, eventually to be replaced by the Apple smartphone. Where is BlackBerry now? Produced by RIM or AM, Random in Motion Company. Um, you know, where is the Motorola's? Where is the Nokia's that were being traditionally associated with the development of smartphones prior to 2007? And look at how the smartphone now has totally revolutionized our behavior as individuals and as business people. And also look at how new services like Airbnb or Uber or Careem in the UAE, etc., in terms of shared mobility platforms, and shared accommodation platforms have actually revolutionized the accommodation and the rental car market, etc. A disruptive technology is sometimes simultaneously disruptive and creative. Okay. Uh, Remember the iPhone. The iPhone basically cannibalized the iPod. Okay, and we'll talk about that later on. Think of Netflix. Netflix totally cannibalized Blockbuster. Okay. Uh, and then a disruptive technology has the power to change the way we work, the way we live, the way we think, the way we behave. Okay. So a quick scenario for you: you're in your driverless car. There's a, as you know, at the moment there's a huge actual investment in driverless car technologies, like Jaguar Land Rover, literally out the road from where I am here in Ireland, has a big scientific research facility looking at the future autonomous driving car. Um, and think about that as well from a Uber perspective. Uber and Kareem and these companies that are relying on basically the supply of drivers to drive cars, okay, to collect consumers, okay. The supply of drivers can be limited in some jurisdictions. So, for example, when Uber went into the Singapore market, Uber actually bought cars that drivers could drive, because cars are very expensive to purchase and drive, etc., and tax, etc., in Singapore. So Uber actually bought cars there for drivers, okay? But their Uber in general does have and Didi in China, etc. They are dependent on the supply of drivers. That's a supply constraint. If you don't need a driver, then you eliminate that supply constraint. Just think of it, okay? But here you are in your driverless car in the future. You're giving voice commands to the car. You're using your Bluetooth connectivity on your phone, etc. You initiate a video call on your smartphone. You ask your smartphone to go back to the office to collect basically the prototype that you printed out the night before on your 3D printer. You're connecting to your tablet through cloud computing in order to refresh your presentation, etc. At the same time, you ring back. You get on to your app on your phone and you set your smart TV at home to record your favorite documentary, etc. All of that was impossible 10 plus years ago, but today these technologies either exist or they are currently in development. Okay, we know at the moment we're in there's 6 levels to autonomous driving. We're in the level 3, the level 4 space at the moment. Huge advancements in autonomous driving. Okay, and new companies are emerging across the globe, basically supporting the research and development of the relevant technologies to achieve this. Think of your currently as through COVID-19, you probably were streaming a lot of films, using Netflix or Prime Video or Disney Plus, etc. All of that has replaced the old DVR, and your discs, and all of that has replaced the old VHS systems. Remember the large actual rectangle discs that you probably rented in a local rental store. Okay, think of your current tablet, how it is replacing the laptop, which replaced the PC, which replaced the actual typewriter. Think of basically retail shopping, and especially think of how retail shopping has been totally revolutionized with COVID. Uh, Unfortunately, some businesses suffered during COVID, but other businesses thrived during COVID, and online shopping was one area that thrived during COVID. Look at the estimated value of online shopping in 2023, $6.4 billion US dollars there. Okay, and then other examples of some disruptive technologies. Maybe you have experienced your parcel being delivered to your business or to your house with drone technology. Amazon have perfected now the delivery, or near perfected anyway, the delivery of actual parcels, etc., to your house. Think also how Amazon has invested in a delivery company called Deliveroo. Deliveroo is delivering your favorite food from your favorite restaurant. Now suddenly Amazon, by investing in Deliveroo, can benefit from economies of scope, because now the Deliveroo driver can now deliver both your favorite takeaway, but also deliver your parcel. That's the economies of scope. Think of the efficiencies and the effectiveness and the economies that can be achieved there in terms of all of these things here. If you have a smartphone, an Apple smartphone, you might often use Siri. If you have a Google smartphone, you might use Alexa in terms of your voice commands, etc. And the whole Internet of Things that have been developing in terms of smart heating or smart air conditioning. Maybe again, you're using an app to control the air conditioning in your apartment or your house before you come home, etc. Okay. And the key question in all of these disruptive technologies is, how is your organization adapting and adopting to these new disruptive technologies? And the key question is are you or your organization an early or a late adopter? Okay. And uh, another question I'd like to pose to you is, has your organization bridged the gap? Okay, so for example, with COVID-19, a lot of businesses unfortunately had to engage in remote working. Okay, and a lot of people had to move towards using the likes of Zoom, um, or platforms like LogMeIn, the go-to meeting or go-to training, or etc. Um, you might have used Microsoft Teams, etc. But what platform and how well did your business adopt and adapt to, say, video conferencing? And a lot of businesses now are beginning to really reassess their actual future in terms of, do we need, and ask themselves questions, do we need to be renting this very expensive office block when we could technically have half or more of our workers working remotely from home? Is there any efficiencies, okay, that we and cost savings that we could actually benefit from the introduction of disruptive technology, e.g., video conferencing platforms within our actual workplace? Now, COVID-19, I'm not saying is the first time you adopted and adapted to these disruptive technologies. You probably, well before pre-COVID-19, booked flights online, you probably booked accommodation online. You might have used one of these platforms here to plan a night in or night out, like maybe a night in there, for example. You might have used Deliveroo now, that has a significant stake from Amazon, in order to get your favorite takeaway delivered. You might have a subscription to Prime Video there, or to Netflix, or to Disney Plus, or some other platforms, for streaming programs. Or you might just want a total relaxation night in, and you might have an app where it's just calming. Or else you might have went out for a night using Open Table to book your restaurant, or Airbnb to book an accommodation, or TripAdvisor maybe to advise you on the type of accommodations or hotels, or what is Paris like, etc., etc. But equally, where one fails to adapt and adopt, that can have serious implications for business And I just give you a slide there, and these slides probably will be made available. But take Blockbuster and Netflix. Uh, Netflix, as you know now, is a key TV streaming company, producing a lot of its own actual films, etc. Blockbuster no longer. And Netflix went on then as a streaming company to win various Oscars. And in 2020, it was nominated for 24 Oscar nominations. And in 2019, it won the Oscar for the Roma film. Okay. So just moving on therefore, from a business perspective, you need to be faster than your competitors in terms of adapting and adopting new technologies. At the end of the day, from a business perspective, you are trying to be ahead of your rival players. You're trying to maintain a competitive advantage via having improved innovation and efficiencies in what you actually deliver. Okay. Now, I'm just going to focus I'm not going to focus on all these, but I'm just going to focus on two disruptive technologies. And the ones I'm going to look at is video conferencing, for example. Um, so remember years ago when you're in your office, you had your desk phone. That was your means of communicating with the outside world, okay, with your suppliers, etc. Now we have unified communications, okay, messaging, mobility, email, video conferencing, and now our we're much more integrated in terms of our business with suppliers, etc. Okay, and there's ongoing evolution in terms of the tools and the softwares and what we can do with all of this actual modern technology. If we take video conferencing, the global video conferencing market size is expected to reach 8.56 billion by 2027. Some of the key players in that are the likes of Adobe, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and probably at the moment the two big rivals, and hence we could draw a critical timeline between Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Look at how Microsoft Teams this past several months has been improving their platform. Remember originally in Microsoft Teams, you probably could only see 4 photos at any given time. They've increased that to at least 9 now, and they're still developing further features. For Zoom, you can see a lot more. I remember from an educational point of view, Microsoft Teams has a slight competitive edge, in that it's integrated with the Microsoft Office 365 suite of programs, and then other platforms like virtual learning environments like Moodle have also integrated into actual Teams. So there's a lot of competition going on between these two various players, but of keen interest at the moment is Zoom and Microsoft Teams. There is also alliances and strategic partnerships and takeovers happening in these as well. I give you, for example, already in December 2019, Blue Jeans partnered with Samsung to offer its video conferencing solution on Samsung's latest smartphone model. So there's a lot of strategic partnerships beginning to develop. And over time, you'll probably see some of these key video conferencing players beginning to form greater alliances and mergers. Same happened in the airline industry with the kind of the One World and the Star alliances, etc. Okay, and excuse my pun, but Zoom is zooming ahead. Despite basically problems that it ran into in the early days of its development called Zoom bombing, where people could actually come in um, into an actual Zoom call, and there may be an untoward behavior happening in there. But look at Zoom. On the 2nd of June 2020, it had a net income of 27 million compared to 200,000 on the 2nd of June 2019, and revenue of 328.2 million compared to 122 million at the same time in 2019. And there's a statement there from the CE of Zoom that definitely the COVID-19 crisis has driven higher demand, with use cases having grown rapidly as people now are using basically Zoom and then other video conference technologies in terms of their work, learning, and also personal lives. Okay. And we're basically also interested from a strategy and competition point of view in how all of this is impacting the business models and efficiencies. And remember, I mentioned earlier, the way meetings are being conducted in the future. Is there a need to be taking that expensive trip to go and meet somebody face to face, even though that's important as well? But maybe certain meetings can now be conducted online and hence save the cost in terms of travel and subsistence, etc. Is there a possibility, as said, that more of your staff could engage in remote working, hence there's less office space requirements, hence less rental costs, etc. And as I said, the reduced T&S expenditure, etc. See, these are some of the questions now that businesses are beginning to ask themselves in this changed environment where the business model is being tested and greater efficiencies can be achieved, e.g. through video conferencing. Take the music industry. You're very familiar with the razor and blade model, that the razor is the loss leader, but you pay the big money. The profit comes from the sale of the actual blades, the same as the printer and print cartridge. You can buy a printer relatively cheap, but then when you go to buy the ink cartridges, they are much dearer. Okay, but interestingly, in Apple, Steve Jobs um, actually used that razor and blade model in reverse. Okay, and the whole idea there was that what was happening with the iPod, the actual iPod, the piece of hardware was making the money, but all the downloads of the music was not profitable. And what eventually Steve Jobs did is he cannibalized the iPod into the actual iPhone. And he simply said that if you don't cannibalize basically your own product, then your competitors will. And think of it in terms of the value appropriation there as well. That, remember, years ago you had to go to the music store, you had to buy the entire CD album of your favorite music artist. Nowadays you can go on to Apple Music, for example, okay, and you can download basically individual songs from the actual online platform. So you can customize, you can personalize basically your purchases, and hence you've a greater price performance ratio as well. I'm just conscious of the time, and probably there's several people that have questions, but we could go on, and we do go on in terms of the whole strategy and competition workshops, in terms of the whole looking at the automobile industry and the whole change of behavior that's happening in the automobile industry. And think of one of the key driving factors in the automobile industry in terms of trying to develop these disruptive autonomous cars is really to reduce the number of deaths and injuries on basically occurring in the automobile industry. And another major consideration is also in terms of developing the electric vehicles. And that is, for example, if you look at there in the EU, that is the target in terms of the reduction in the CO2 emissions by 2030 compared to what they are, say, in 2015 as well. So there's a number of factors there that is trying to change our behavior, moving away from maybe petrol or diesel cars to hybrid cars to electric vehicles. A lot of basically advancements in technology in those cars. And then just to finish off, Jaguar Land Rover has basically declared its intention to move to destination zero a world of zero emissions, zero accidents, and zero congestion. And remember, I mentioned earlier to you the idea of Uber, Careem, Didi, all of these mobile sharing companies that they face a supply constraint, not enough drivers. Eliminate the drivers, have the autonomous driverless car, you basically eliminate the supply constraint. Then all you have to have is your autonomous car to meet the demand coming from consumers who want to use your Uber or Didi service, etc. So I could go on more. I've loads more to actually talk about, but I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to open up the floor, William, to any particular questions that anybody has. So thank you for
Fantastic.
your attendance.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Paul. Very, very insightful. We do have several questions here. We'll just go through a couple now. First and foremost, is digital transformation a strategy or more fundamentally a new business model? Sorry, new business model.
Digital transformation needs to be seen more of a strategy that one basically can implement in terms of your business context. And there are some recent reports produced by the likes of Gartner and IIDT, etc., outlining the whole concept of how you can execute your digital transformation strategy. As I said, the key is the ability to adapt and to adopt. So for example, a lot of auditing companies, like in Ireland here, our controller and auditor general, they still like, in their rules and regulations, to see the paper-based copy of a certain document. Now, they are going to need to change their regulations in order for a full digital transformation to a paperless office to occur. So you may have a digital transformation strategy in-house, but you also might be subject to basically regulations from government authorities who might be saying, well, we would rather see a physical copy of this invoice or whatever the case is. So the number of recent reports goes through the scenarios like that, but at the end of the day, all those reports are actually highlighting that there will be an increase in digital transformation, not to 100%, but there will be incremental increases over time, But it's not just a company working on their own, it's a whole of basically society, organization, and government involvement as well. So hopefully that
Brilliant.
answers. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very clear. Thank you very much, Paul. We do have another one here from Fatima asking, what would you say is the best way to convince organizations to adapt to disruptive technology?
I suppose at the end of the day, there's no point in forcing any change on any organization or as workers without bringing the organization, or more so the workers, along with you. Because if the workers cannot see a benefit from the change, they're going to resist it. But if you can show the organization, and more so the workers within that organization, the benefits to the organization and the benefits to the actual worker, then there's a greater probability that you will actually achieve basically a change management exercise. Approximately 20+% of, say, customer relationship rollouts in terms of new software don't work because it hasn't been fully explained to the various stakeholders the needs, the benefits deriving from this actual change. Okay, so hopefully that answers that.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got another one here from Dr. Ehsan. He's asking how disruptive technologies are changing the workplace.
Well, again, just briefly, if you take, for example, I was involved in an exercise there about 3 years ago now, where I was looking at a company that was engaged in processing invoices for other companies, and we were in there looking at the productivity of the workforce, basically how many invoices they could process in a day, in a week. Okay, and we observed a number of business practices, and one of those business practices was they were simply using single screen monitors. And we changed the business practice that each actual worker would have a double screen monitor. So now on the double screen monitor, on one screen, they could have the financial package open, and on the other screen, they could have the invoice or their email attachment open. And we then monitored the overtime then, and we noticed that the productivity of those workers increase by simply changing the actual technology that they had at a given time. So, and we measured that increase in productivity through the extra number of invoices that were processed in a given day or a given week. And the other thing is the fact that workers can now work from home with, say, video conferencing technology like, say, your Zoom or your Microsoft Teams or GoToMeeting, whatever the case is. Some workers are more productive at home because they don't have the time of having to sit in traffic on the way to work. They don't have the time sitting in traffic, maybe on going back home from work, etc. And it has been shown that in some cases, not in all cases though, not in all cases, that the actual productivity has improved. Actually, in Sweden, they showed actually even that moving from a 5-day week to a 4-day week actually improved the overall technology of workers. So disruptive technologies, if though, and it's important, if they are basically implemented, adopted, and adapted correctly, they should, on average, increase the overall productivity of workers. And that should then be seen in the bottom line for companies in terms of higher performance, higher profitabilities, etc., etc. So hopefully that answers
Fantastic,
that.
thank you very much. Very clear. We'll just take another two, I think. I'm just very conscious of time here. Said is asking, how or do you see the influence of disruptive technology? How do you see it? How do you see its impact on the job market at the moment? Do you see any sort of impact from disruptive technologies being applied in companies? Is that impacting the job market, and if so, how?
Yeah, there's no doubt it is. For example, if you just Google maybe the Amazon or Alibaba modern warehouse, you'll probably see that in those warehouses now, where there was hundreds of workers in a distribution context, you now see all these little small, what they call robots or little bots, BOTS, that basically go down, collect the pallet where the product is, brings it up to a worker who simply then basically puts into a package and ships it. In those warehouses, there's less workers, but the overall productivity within that warehouse is actually improved. However, even though there's less manual workers working on the floor of that warehouse, you still need more people with IT knowledge so that they're aware that they can basically work the systems that control these small little bots that collect the pallets throughout the actual warehouse. I would encourage anybody on the webinar today, just Google, and you'll find it very, very interesting. Just Google for a video on the modern Alibaba or the modern Amazon warehouse. It's very interesting, and look at less workers, greater productivity, but yet you need workers behind the scenes who basically have new skills in the IT professional area. Probably less manual workers, but more in the IT professional. So hopefully that helps answer that, William.
Fantastic. It really does. Thank you very much, Paul. We'll just take one more here. If every market sector is now based on digital, then everyone is your competitor or potential competitor. So how can you define and deliver a sustainable customer value proposition in this turbulence?
I suppose there's a Japanese saying, kaizen, Kaizen, and that is continuous improvement. Unfortunately, one cannot stand still, and that is the detriment of any organization that thinks that if it introduces a new disruptive technology that gives them a competitive edge today in time period T, in time period tomorrow, T plus one, your competitors could simply catch up. Look at how the likes of Nokia and Motorola did not respond to this revolutionary Apple iPhone in 2007. And where is Nokia and Motorola today? So the important thing there is, with all of this digital technology, just don't think that if you just introduce, and you convert your employees to using Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting like that's the end of it. You need constant training, upskilling of basically how to use that platform more effectively as well. As I said at the beginning of the answer, Kaizen, continuous improvement. So hopefully that answers
Fantastic.
that, William. Okay.
Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, Paul. That's very interesting indeed.
So it's been nice to meet everybody, and hopefully you got some nuggets of wisdom, as William said, from that. So and the best, and I wish everybody safe as well in these challenging times with COVID.
Thank you very much, Paul. It does mean a lot. Of course, apologies, everyone. I know that you've got several questions that you've been asking, but we can't unfortunately cover all of them at this time. However, I hope that it has been insightful. I hope that you have enjoyed Paul Patton's presentation, and please feel free to see the recording of the presentation on our website. I've put the link in the chat box so you can check out our website. It's on the events page of the University of Manchester's website. So it's manchester.ac.ae/events/webinars. So thank you very much for attending this session once again, ladies and gentlemen. We do hope that you've enjoyed the session, and we wish you all a very good weekend here in the Middle East. So do stay tuned for further sessions and further webinars as well. You can just check our website on the events page. We do post all our future events. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Paul Patton, for this presentation, and see you all very soon. Take care.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, William.